Okay folks, on this video we're just going to talk about the installation of SQL Server. The reason why this video's come into being is unfortunately I had a catastrophic failure on my old PC, and it involves me actually reinstalling it on a brand new machine. So I've gone from Windows Vista to Windows 7 64-bit, so therefore I'll be going through a 64-bit installation. The installation media itself is going to be SQL Server 2008 R2, and this is the developer edition. So if you're interested in how to actually get your hands onto different versions of SQL Server, you'll need to go to the Microsoft website and make the appropriate choice. For myself, because I am a developer, I can actually get the developer edition, which is significantly cheaper, however can only be used, must stress, can only be used in development scenarios. Okay, so how do we install it? Well, what we'll do is I've got the drive up, and I'm going to just start up setup, obviously. What you may find is if you put the disk in, it will automatically do this step for us. So once this comes up, it should come up with a whole raft of options, mainly the tabs down the side. Yes, I know they're links on the left, but Microsoft calls them tabs. On the tabs on the left hand side you have several different options. In my impatience I clicked on it twice. Let me just close that down. Okay, so what we've got is we've got planning, so we can actually go through and make sure everything is okay on our system prior to doing it, and I do strongly recommend you do that. Then you could skip that step if you've been doing it over and over again. You could just go straight into the installation. Maintenance is a way of either repairing a SQL issue. If you've got your SQL Server in a cluster environment, you can remove it as a node. Very, very important things when you do SQL clustering. I'm not a DBA, but I know that it works in a slightly different flavour as a service. So if you were to actually remove a SQL node, you would have to do it via this particular way, i.e. remove the node from the SQL Server failover cluster. So you can do an edition upgrade. So if you actually went from, as I say here, the developer to enterprise edition, you've also got a repair option. If there's any sort of corrupt files, then tools is just any other additional features you want to actually install, which we'll be going through the installation anyway. After that we just go off to the web, and then in advanced, anything else that is exciting in regards cluster preparation and so forth, but we won't be going into that on this video. So we're going to go into the planning section first. This may sound very, very basic and simple to yourselves, but they are very important steps to actually cover. So the first thing which is on here is you have the hardware and software requirements. So if we click onto that, this will just bring up a web page showing you the general information. Great, just tells you what the software is. I strongly recommend you read this, but it's a video, this is boring, however it is quite important to go through. What we may want to do is have an interactive view of this instead. Well, this is where we've actually got the system configuration checker. So if we just click onto that, it should start up this little utility, which will then whiz through all the actual options on our PC to make sure the software is correct, our hardware is correct, for this to actually work as a viable installation. So the dialog box kicks in, and it's now just doing a check. So it's going through a list of options. Now this is all what I want to see. 15 things have passed, failed, 0 warnings and skipped. So let's just go into show details. So it's immediately telling me my operating system's correct. I have got myself in as the administrator. I can restart the computer. Windows Management Information Service, that's to do with Performance Monitor, which we'll be looking at on one of the other SQL videos. Consistent validation of SQL registry keys, so it just means that admin can get onto the registry and make sure everything's okay. Long path file names on your installation media. We went from Windows XP, DOS and so forth into NTFS world. You had long file names. Suddenly you were no longer limited to your 8+3, i.e. 8 characters for your file name, .3 extension. God, that's so long ago. However, it's still a viable option on here. What else we got? Well, we've got the SQL Server setup product incompatibility. Well, that passed. Sounds a bit weird, but it's just this product making sure is it compatible. Unsupported SQL Server products. Is there any other databases which are actually on here? If there was a problem, it would have given you a warning. Performance counter, registry hive, consistency, fine. Everything should be fine on here because it's a brand new install of Windows 7. So we've got everything down here, and the most elusive option, Windows PowerShell, which I will probably get onto on another video, completely independent to SQL. It is relevant to SQL. It's also relevant to Microsoft Office. It is a very powerful option if you're on Windows 7. Just going to click on OK. Incidentally, if you have a rerun button, if there was any problems with any of these, if you fix them with the dialog box open, you could always obviously click on rerun. So we can OK that. It just is a little bit clunky. It will now go and just run the current operations again. It basically keeps tabs of what you've done on this dialog box. As you can see, it's greyed out because we are now acceptable. We don't need to do an upgrade advisor because we've not got SQL installed, but if we went onto this, it would warn us of any problems with 2000 and 2005 to 2008. Typically, biggest problems are going to be things like from 2000 to 2008 it's going to be Integration Information Services, or as it was known, DTS, Data Transformation Services. That was the biggie difference between 2000 and 2005. Everything else seemed to upgrade fine. There was some issues with the reporting services and integration services aspects, but the core databases never really had a problem. So I don't really need to do anything more on here. I've got everything I need. There's documentation, getting started with failover clustering and so on. As I said, we're not going to go through that. I'm good to go. So what I'll do is I'll just go to the installation option, and then I've got a series of different options. So installation of a new or an existing one, so do some extras. SQL Server failover cluster installation, no, not interested in that. Add a node, upgrade, no, none of those things. So it's going to be the top one. So launch a wizard to install 2008. So click onto that and away we go. Okay, so what's the first thing it does? Well, it pretty much does the same checking as what we've already done. However, it's always a good idea to run the little application prior to actually going into this facility. Slight difference, 7, let's have a look. So can you see it's sort of like a rundown version of what we've already checked. The other one was more comprehensive because it covers everything. For example, I talked about PowerShell. You'll notice it's not actually on this list. These are the core fundamental options required for SQL Server. If you want to make sure that SQL Server is never going to have a problem within the confines of the installation, that is, run the other option I showed you first. This is great, but it is just the core values that we're actually monitoring here, not the full thing. So with that, I'm just going to click on to OK, and we should start the journey of installation. So immediately what it should be doing is it'll be bringing up a screen giving you the options as to which edition you want to run. Now, because I am part of a MSDN license, which is the developer network, I actually have a key which unfortunately I have hidden from view. Unfortunately, there's no way you can see that, it's blocked out. However, above that we do have specify the edition, so you can put an evaluation on. An evaluation is 128 days, sorry, I apologise, 180 days, which is 3 months. You can install Express and Express with advanced services. Now, if you're doing anything towards analysis services, reporting services and so forth, you really are going to be limited with Express. So you either have to go for 180 day if you're just trying to learn this for college, university or for your own benefit. So the evaluation will give you 180 days of the server. However, if you're going to use it for a much longer period, you're either going to have to buy it or get the developer edition, which, as I mentioned earlier, is significantly cheaper. So obviously I don't want that. I want my product key, which again you won't be able to see. So I'm just going to click on next. and away we go. So this will just do the evaluation and the typical EULA, which is the end user license terms. So I'm just going to accept that. And do I want to send feature data to Microsoft? As I'm a developer, I want to help out Microsoft as much as possible, so if there is any crashes or any problems, there will be a log file sent to them. Again, it will ask me prior to submitting. So I'm going to click Next, and now it should bring up my list of options to install. So partially what's going to happen is it's going to start installing a load of setup files locally, which are going to be constantly referenced throughout the entire process. So this takes a few moments. In fact, it's actually asking me to install it. Okay, I'll just click on install. So off it goes. It's calculating scenarios. It sounds all exciting. All it's doing is it's copying some temporary files, and what we will have in a moment is the ability to choose what we want. Okay, so we're now at a point where it's actually gone through the support rules. Now it's gone through some of the other options, making sure that the WoW platform supported, Windows Firewall, PowerShell. Here we go. So these are the secondary options. Everything's fine. It's past 11. Great. Let's move on. And now it will ask me, what do I want to do? So is it a SQL Server feature installation, i.e. is it the whole enchilada? Are we looking at the whole thing? Are we actually putting SQL Server and Powerpivot for SharePoint? Right, Powerpivot is a new feature in 2008. It's basically compat a lot of the other business intelligence tools which are out there. One of the areas which has been sadly lacking in Microsoft's arena is the ability to very quickly extract information from cubes without it having any sort of negligible performance impact on the client. And so what came about was Powerpivot for SharePoint. So it allows SharePoint 2010 to actually have a form of web service which does all the number crunching and the grunt work, which just means then the PC only via a web browser will actually return all this information in the format of a in the form of a pivot table or a pivot chart in Excel, which is where the majority of your settings are going to be in regards the way you want it to look. Now what we could do is, if we chose that, it would then ask us, well, is it an existing farm for SharePoint or is it a new SharePoint installation, and so on. Unfortunately, all my videos aren't really going to go to that degree because I don't have SharePoint at hand. However, if in the future I do have the time, great, I'll try and do it for you. So what else we got? We've got all features with defaults, installs all features with defaults using service accounts. No. You want really the top one. That is something if you're just installing it on your local PC and you're not bothered about any of the configuration options. The purpose of this video is configuration, so I'm going to choose the SQL Server feature and click on Next. So it brings up the dialog box, which is the important one. What do we want? Well, we could just tick the box and say select all. That's cheating. I'm just going to unselect. What we need to do is just understand what each one of these elements are. So first thing is database engine service. Well, yeah, you're going to want SQL Server, aren't you? So clicking on that, it will actually give you some descriptions off to the side. SQL Server replication service. Have you got more than one SQL Server and you want to replicate the data so if one server goes down, another one can pick it up? Well, it's a local install for me, so I don't have replication availability for me. Full text search. Do you want SQL to be able to search through memo fields where there could be millions of characters in one particular record? I'm going to tick that because that's useful for some of the commands that I may want to come through later on. For yourselves, if it's just purely for your own development, you may want to have that switched off. It's totally up to you. You can always turn it off afterwards. Obviously, analysis services, cubes and reporting services, fine. Where's integration services on here? Well, oddly enough, it's not actually discussed really here. It's down here. Business Intelligent Development Studio. Absolutely, we're going to want Visual Studio. Client tools and connectivity, yes. And there we go, integration services. Now why is it there rather than a feature? Because it is a shared feature, because integration services communicates with multiple different data sources, not just SQL. So that's why it's down there. Okay, fine. Client tools for backwards compatibility. Older versions of SQL basically. Yes, no problem. Client tools developer kit. Sure, why not? Books online, no. Books online, it just puts a load of data onto your hard disk, which you technically don't need if you've got the internet these days. So we're not going to tick that box. Generally, when I tick this box, it usually added another 10 minutes to the installation, just pure and simply because it was just downloading a load of web pages. No, I'll just go on the web if I get stuck. Management tools, basic, well, yeah, I would tick that box because I want both of them. I want everything available to me. SQL client connectivity tools, yes, absolutely. And then Microsoft Sync framework. Synchronization platform to enable collaboration and offline for application services and devices. This allows things like mobile devices to communicate with SQL and so on. You may have come across the Sync framework if you've got a Windows phone, because Microsoft Sync is the way of communicating from a mobile device to a PC. It's an extension to that. It allows it to synchronize multiple data sets, etc, etc. I'm going to tick that box, even though from a local installation point I'm probably not going to ever use it, but from a training perspective it's not a bad idea. So I've gone through everything on here, but I've not ticked absolutely everything. I've missed out a couple of things. Finally, where do we want to actually install all of this information? Because I'm on a 64-bit platform, you'll see that I've got program files and then program files and in brackets x86. My shared features are generally 32-bit. Whereas the core application will be 64-bit, and so I do tend to have two program files now. If you wanted to, you can adjust the installation to put it onto a different drive, especially important if you're doing proper server installations. You generally keep one drive for your operating system, another drive for your service, and another drive for your databases, another drive for your log files, and another drive for your index files, etc, etc. If you're doing a full-blown beefy server, you tend to actually put your services and your features all on different drives, and they have to be physical different drives, not just going to the same shared location. For example, if you've got a SAN, you could have a C, D and E drive, but they're all going to exactly the same place at the end of the day. This is a network drive. If you are doing a beefy server, you tend to try and make sure that all your information is running on different disks, because it gives you an enormous performance boost because of parallelism, because I could be reading off one drive, writing to another and reading from another one all simultaneously, which you cannot do if it's all on the same disk. Right, so I'm going to click on next. Right, so here we go, it's just running another check, so let's just do show details. Pass, here we go. So SharePoint's not applicable. I didn't choose a SharePoint installation, as you can see, because of Powerpivot and so on. So I'll go down my shared components, and basically what I'm looking for is warnings, which I haven't got any. I have 18 skipped though, and basically I've just gone through these. They're all fine. They're all to do with SharePoint. See, there's 3, 4, 5, 6 farms and SharePoint options not applicable to us, so that's fine. I'll just click on to next, and away we go. Final steps then. Default instance name. What do we want it to actually be called? Right, well, when you install SQL, we've talked about this on other videos, is that you have an instance. So you could actually have multiple instances of SQL 2008 running all at the same time. So I could have a sales SQL Server, an account SQL Server, and a training SQL Server. Technically you could say, well, I could have those as separate databases in the same SQL Server, absolutely, but from a security perspective you may want to have multiple instances running. Obviously the more instances, the more money it's going to cost, because you have to buy SQL over and over again. So at the moment it says the default instance only. what will happen is that will become the local option, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Finally, what's the root directory, i.e. where is all the data going to be stored? So you can see down here it's telling me the SQL Server directory, analysis services and reporting services directory all going to be off the C drive. That's fine because I've only got a C drive to work off, so I'll just click on to next. And what will happen now is it will just check for the disk space requirements. And here it comes. So it's saying I've got enough space to install it all. So what have we got total? Well, this is going to actually use 5 gig, well 6 gig really, of disk space. Fine, I need it, so I'm going to click on to next. At any stage, if you're not happy, you can obviously click on back. So we'll do next. And now comes the long wait as it will start installing everything. Sorry, apologies. Before we get to that point, how do we want things to start up in Windows? So at the moment we don't have any accounts for any of these particular options. Now what this means is when Windows starts, do we want it to use a specific account, i.e. we don't need to be logged in all the while? So we've got it as a network service, we've got it as a local service for these particular options, that's fine. But obviously the database engine is going to need something, so clicking on the drop down arrow it brings up a list. So I'm going to choose system for that one, but generally what you should do is have a proper domain name already created, a system account, for example SQL admin or something along those lines, as a dedicated account that you would use from machine to machine as the standard service account. So in my case I'm going to just do the same for all of them. Now you could use same account for all SQL services, but I always leave integration services on network because it needs to talk out everywhere else. Final thing is, what do we want it to do on startup? Well, this PC is also my personal PC, so I don't want it on all the while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off certain elements to a manual status, so I have to turn them on when I want to actually use them. It actually speeds up your PC if you do this, but remember you have to actually enable them when you come to actually do your development work, otherwise you'll get errors. Integration services as well I'm going to put onto a manual basis, so the only thing that's going to be working is the database server. Fine, let's click on to next. And now the final bit, which is just basically our authentication mode. Do we want it in Windows or mixed mode? Mixed mode allows for SQL's own security platform as well as Windows. Nowadays most people just stick to Windows authentication mode. I'm going to put it in mixed mode because I'm old school. And also now what we'll need to do is create for the SA, the system account, the server account, what we actually want the password to be. So I'm just going to put in my own password. I'm not telling you what it is, obviously. And then also from a SQL Server administration perspective, who do we want in the SQL administrators group? Well, add your current self, add yourself, and then that should bring up who you are on here. Okay, so I'm admin on PC1. You can also at this point click on add if you wanted to add any others, but then you would need to know the names of those particular users on your PC. Or domain, I should say. Right, the other tabs, data directory, is just basically where all your databases are going to be stored, where the log files are stored. This is what I was talking about, the parallelism. Slapping them all on different disks is a good idea if you have the capability of doing that. So at the moment they're all sitting all in the same place, all on the C drive in the same area. But it's a good idea to separate them out as much as possible if you can. You can change this after the installation, but it's a good idea if you've got it set up already, just do it now. Makes life a lot easier. And then file streams. Now these are quite interesting little options here. And what it allows you to do is any of your blob fields, which is your varchar maxes, the horrendously massive fields which allow you to put as much text as you like in them. they wreak havoc on database systems to the point that you can't index them, you can't really search on them with like statements. That's incidentally what the full text search is for that we could have turned on earlier. So what are we doing in here? Well, enabling this will actually mean that rather than saving that data in the actual database, it saves it off into a separate file somewhere else. It actually gives a bit of a performance increase, but if you were to do that, then you would need to specify shares where this is actually going to be kept, because you normally would put this on a network somewhere because of replication. You can't just save it on one drive, because if you replicate it, how is that other SQL box going to see it? So you generally would actually put a window share on, which means that all the SQL boxes can see it all at the same time. Local machine for me, I don't really care, but it is quite an interesting thing, and I would suggest you read up on it if you are looking at this from a performance standpoint on your live services. So okay, I'm going to click on next. And account provisioning, which one has permissions to analysis services, doesn't really help you on the dialog box apart from reading the small print and up here. So add current user again, and all being well, data directories, again exactly the same as before, choose different locations to increase performance. Let's click on next. And then what are we doing? Are we doing it in native mode, i.e. is it a SQL installation, is it Sharepoint, or do you want to install it but don't configure reporting services? Now this facility was put in 2005. The reason was that you can, if you've come across it, you can integrate reporting services into Sharepoint. However, there is a trade-off. What's in charge of the permissions? Who's in charge of it? Well, it ultimately goes down into reporting services world rather than, sorry, I'll rephrase that, it goes into SharePoint world, which is AD security, rather than reporting services, which again is AD security, but it's all inbound inside SQL Server. So what you may want to do is you want to install it in native mode, i.e. meaning go away, you're never using SharePoint. Or alternatively, do you want to put it on that one saying, I'm not too sure yet, but it will allow me to actually choose whether I want it on SharePoint or reporting services at a later date. Well, I'm going to choose that one because I don't have SharePoint, but please bear in mind that's why you've got three options. Install it default with everything, install it for SharePoint. I'm not too sure yet. Which one do you want to use? I'm going to choose the top one. And now again it's asking me, do I want to send errors? Well, I'm a good boy, so yeah, I'm going to tick that box and click on to next, and all being well we should be right at the end. And so it's now just doing the final few rules. Let's have a look. So FAT32 file system passed, etc, etc, etc. What other options we got? Clustering, cross-language installation, reporting services catalog for database existence, temporary database. So that's your report server file and your temp report server database file. So everything's fine, it's good to go. It's skipped two things which aren't applicable. Let's click on to next, and here we go. Final confirmation steps. This is what you're going to install. So all of the things that we've done so far, the last 15 minutes of talking, key things is always scroll down to the bottom and make sure your authentication options are correct with what you've set on, because once you've installed it, it is a pain in the backside to actually put it back together again. So it's a good idea to go through this and make sure everything is correct prior to clicking on install, because once you install it, it's much more difficult to actually change it. You can change it, but it's far more difficult. So let's hit install. And now we'll just leave it to go. So lots of things are going to be whizzing away. There should be no interaction until we reach the end when we get marked as complete. So I'll pause my recording until we get to that point. And so there you have it. You've now got a complete installation of SQL Server 2008 R2. If everything went well, you should see that you've got your SQL Server 2008 R2 installation completed successfully message. And there you have it. Any further updates and so forth, we can go back and run the setup program again. But fundamentally, that's the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching.